Okay, let me, okay, here we go. Okay, welcome back. A little technical problems there, but we're back. And this is by 106 Science 2, continuing on with chapter 1. And this slide here is pseudoscience. In a field of study that is falsely presented as having a scientific basis. So it's really important to realize what is science and what isn't. And a good example of some pseudoscience is astrology, for example. Now, there's two things that deals with the heavens, astronomy and astrology. Even though astrology ends in L-O-G-Y, it's a lot older than astronomy, it's baloney. It's not real science. It's been tested, actually, that somehow the moment of the alignment of stars and planets at the moment of your birth has some effect on your personality, your behavior, and nothing ever been shown to be the case. Psychic ability, telekinesis, completely blown. No scientific basis whatsoever. But still, I have to look at it, and it has actually been tested. Even some religious things have been tested, like the power of prayer has actually been scientifically tested, and it's shown that there is no power of prayer. But you have to be open-minded. You see, in science, you got to be skeptical, right? Always be skeptical, because later on we're going to look at where you can get good information and how you have to be skeptical about where this information comes from. You still have to have an open mind to some crazy things that might actually be correct, like continental drift. A guy named Alfred Wegener proposed, I guess, in the early part of last century, that continents move over time. And then people thought he was nuts. Moving continents, well, they do. That's real. And something, and now we know how they do that, but something even like acupuncture, how sticking a needle into your ear over here will cause pain relief someplace else in your body. That sounds crazy. It works, though. It works. Nobody knows how it works, but it does. So you got to have an open mind. Okay. You have to look at several indicators to determine whether something you hear is pseudoscience or not. And this is in part of this is the nature of the evidence for this thing that's being put forward as science, like anecdotal evidence. Oh, you hear these things, so somebody said this over here, somebody said this over here, and people somehow becomes, collective reality when there's nothing to it. It's like urban myths, like these urban myths get started. There's a lot of these. One of my favorite is the fact that we only use 10% of our brains. Now, where have you heard this? I've heard it all over the place, and they even had a movie with Johansson about her starting to use more than 10%. Well, you use your entire brain at all times. You may use other parts of your brain more intensely than other parts, but you use your whole brain. I think where that 10% may have come from is the fact that the really higher aspects of brain function, critical thinking, figuring things out, memory, you may only use 10% of your brain on that. But you use an incredible amount of your brain and in your senses, for example, to analyze senses and for movement. Huge parts of your brain are devoted to that. And so I don't know where it began, but that was anecdotal, and it's baloney. You use your whole brain all the time. Okay. So features of science, features of pseudoscience. It adheres to established and well-recognized scientific method, does not adhere to that. Repeatable results. Can they be repeatable? In science, if you can't repeat them, relate on a single person or solely opinion, no. Open testable claims that can be disproven. Can you disprove this? If you can't, it's outside science. I can tell you that there's invisible unicorns rotating around the earth that's giving me signals about what to do and say. Okay, disprove that. You can't. It's outside the realm of science. This is why also the existence of supernatural beings and supernatural forces outside, you can't disprove them. So they're outside of science. Open outside review. Refusal to accept contradictory evidence. This is not science. Multiple lines of evidence. You gotta, and science is really of the strongest theories bring together evidence from all different areas and lines. If you just don't over-reliance on one small bit of data, that's not science. So you consider the source of the evaluation. Where does this information coming from? All right. And part of this is could be like also like testimonials. Person is giving a testimonial, telling you that, oh, you've seen these things, like I got a real estate way, or a stock picking thing that's infallible, or a method for gambling that you can't lose at. It sounds too good to be true. It is. It's usually given to you by people who are trying to sell you something. These are testimonials, and you're like I made $7,000 last week following this real estate formula. Well, that's baloney. Publish a study in a peer-reviewed journal. Best way, the absolute best information is in that article in that peer-reviewed journal. But here's the problem: they're really hard to read. I mean, they're written in a way that's so jargon-filled and so specific that you really have a rough time figuring out unless you are right in the field itself. So what we depend upon is scientific journalists who know about this, who could take this jargon-filled thing and write out articles that explain things to us in a way that in regular language that we can understand. And so any kind of regular magazine like Discover magazine or Natural History magazine, or a big city newspaper or a magazine, they generally try to be accurate. I mean, they blow it sometimes, but they genuinely can be trusted. But what about a supermarket tabloid, like the National Enquirer? No, this is not. This is not something you can trust. They can say anything about anybody or anything. So you have this like a reliability checklist. Is information current? Is the source primary, not secondary? Is it like hearsay? Are the authors identifiable and well qualified? Like I had one student taking this raw food diet, and she said it was great, and it was put forth by this guy named Wilson, who had all these letters after his name, And so I wanted to check this guy out. Where did he get his PhD or his master's degree or wherever? I couldn't find out. I went on a web, big search, couldn't find out where. So you can put in letters after your name. You could say anything on the web, and it's baloney. Does the author lack potential conflicts of interest? Conflict of interest. Do they have a conflict of interest? This is why, not that I'm pushing, for certain magazines or things, but Consumer Reports. They try to be objective, and they don't have any advertising. All right? No advertising, because that's a conflict of interest. So they're taking money from Ford Motor Company, and they're reviewing Ford automobiles. That's a conflict of interest. Experiments of reference cited. Do they give you their source material, where they first got their ideas from? Are the experiments described in detail enough that someone could repeat these using the same materials and same procedures? Was information peer-reviewed? Was it sent out for experts in the field to look at? Was the information unbiased? And that is, bias is something affecting the experiment that you didn't control for. And somehow you got biased. It wasn't a double blind, for example, that would be bias. And sometimes the bias is like not even noticeable, and it's completely honest by the researchers. They just didn't realize this, and they biased their experiments. But out and out fraud would be, that's the end of your scientific career. There's no science police out there saying, making sure people aren't cooking the books. You cook up data, you make stuff up, you publish it, might even get peer reviewed and accepted, and then find out that you faked it. Forget about it. Get a new profession, you're done. You will never be trusted again. Trust comes once, right? And you violate that trust. Like this one guy wrote a nonfiction book, turned out it was completely fiction. Well, never gonna buy another book from him ever again. Is it intended source known and valid? What is the intent here? Are they trying to sell you something, or are they trying to make money off of this? If they are, then you have to think, okay, that's why a lot of these drug tests should be done by independent labs outside of the drug company, because the drug company wants to develop this drug and wants to make money on it. Okay. Okay, now we get into properties of life. So take a little bit of a turn from how we do science to look at the properties of life. How do you determine whether something is alive or not alive? You think, well, that kind of easy thing to do. Well, actually, no. There are multiple qualities of life. Life is a really complex thing, and they have certain characteristics, and they have to exhibit all of those characteristics, not just one or two, but all of them. Because some non-living objects may display some of the properties, but not all. Growth, for example. Living things grow. Well, so do crystals. Crystals grow also. Are crystals alive? No, they're not. Okay, let's look at these properties. Okay, order. I mean, living things are the most highly ordered things that we know of, and the most complex things we know of. Living things are composed of cells. I'm going to get into a whole chapter on cells and look into cells and different types of cells and what's inside a cell. But living things is called the cell theory, made of cells. If it's not made up of cells, it's not alive. Growth and development, as I mentioned. We grow larger. Actually, in development, we start off looking really different, right? When we were, a solid ball of cells in our mother's uterus. We look really different as an embryo and as a fetus. And then we grow larger once we're born. So we grow and we develop. Energy processing. Living things process energy. They have to. They have to take in energy, use energy to do work, and then energy leaves them. And then they need more energy. You have to do work to stay alive. Every second you're alive, you're working at it. And you need energy to do that. Okay. Regulation. This is called homeostasis. The regulation of a constant internal environment. The inside of your body is really different from the outside, and it has to remain that way. And you have to actually work at it to do that. So what things like am I talking about, like body temperature, for example? It has to be regulated. We respond to our environment. Sometimes it's called irritability. We respond to things happening in the environment, right? Reproduction. We reproduce. We make individuals of the same species, right? And then evolution. Living things evolve. They change from generation to generation. That's actually a fact. It's called microevolution. And nobody disputes that. Macroevolution, when we get to evolution, we'll talk about how can these small changes from generation to generation lead to really big changes over long periods of time that lead to different species. Some people don't buy that. Most scientists do. But evolution is an absolute characteristic of life. We change from generation to generation, we change. And we'll talk about later on how that happens in later chapters. All right. Okay. Well, this is called the unity and diversity of living things. And that's like a contradiction in terms, right? So, and what that means is the unity of life is when we get down to basic cellular functions, how cells work and how living things operate, everybody does pretty much the same thing. It's a real unity of life. But there's incredible diversity of life on Earth also. There's all kinds of different forms and functions and different ways organisms make a living. There's incredible diversity. So it's, but when we get right down to like molecular processes and what's really going on, everybody does the same thing. Okay. So when we look for extraterrestrial life under the planets, how is it going to work? Where we assume, and that's what we have to, at the beginning, that life on other planets would pretty much work the same way it does here. But we don't know. I mean, it's got tremendous diversity, and maybe even in the fundamental processes, there's diversity. We all have the same fundamental processes because we all evolved from the very first cells that appeared on Earth about 3.5 billion years ago. So that's why we all do the same thing. But another planet could have been a whole different thing, but we don't know because we only have one example of life. And we're going to figure out that if there was life on Mars or there is life on Mars, it's going to be working in pretty much the same way. There's an example of diversity of life in Namibia. Those are all different species of organisms. Later on, we'll talk about what a species is and how species are maintained and how species change. Then, major themes in biology. There's certain 5 recurring themes that recur through most of the investigation of biology. The relationship of structure to functions, information flow, pathways that transform energy and matter, interactions with biological systems, and evolution. And we're going to look at each one of these individually. I'll get started on this. I'm not sure I'll finish it. We'll see whether we go on to a third video, because I don't want to go too much past half hour, 40 minutes. Okay. Correlative structure and function. See at different levels. So the branch structure of the lungs provide a huge surface area. Indentations of red blood cells increase surface area to which oxygen didn't get diffused. And there's always a close correlation between the structure and function. What does the structure do? And its structure will aid its function. Like the incredible surface area in the lungs. And explain how correlation between structure and function applies to a tennis racket. We're going to hit the ball over the net. Well, we're not going to do that with a stick. You got to have a stick, but a wide area so you can hit the ball. So the whole idea is to get the ball over the net, and that flat area that's filled with strings is going to allow you to do that. Okay. Information must be received, transmitted, and used. So information flow is apparent at all levels of biological information. Your brain gets information about all kinds of internal um, variables, your blood sugar, your body temperature, your blood, what's called the blood pH, all kinds of stuff, and level of hormones. Um, it, uh, it gets all this information, it processes it and sends out um, um, actions to maintain homeostasis. For example, pancreas acts on information, but a level of glucose in your blood to decide how much insulin to put out in your blood, because insulin will lower blood glucose. So if your blood glucose is really high, pancreas puts out more insulin to lower the blood glucose. If the glucose is really low, it stops making the insulin, and then the glucose comes back up. Every gene contains, and this is information flowing, genetic, hereditary information. Every cell contains genes, hereditary units of information consisting of specific sequences of DNA that are passed from generation to generation. And this is in DNA. Right? Genes are just a section of DNA that codes for a particular protein. Right now, you may not know what that means, but later on, we're going to get into that in much more detail. And the language of life has an alphabet of just 4 letters. The letters in your DNA determines what proteins you make and determines all your particular physical and mental characteristics. And there's only 3 letters, A, G, C, and T. And there's a molecule of DNA right now. I'm not going to get into too much about the structure now, because we'll talk about much more about the sequence of those letters and what they mean and how they are information, genetic information. Okay, and we're going to look at mutations in DNA later on. In order to make new cells, you have to copy DNA. Whenever you copy DNA, you make errors. So like typos, like copying certain pages over and over again, you're going to make an error here or there. And that's what mutations are. And almost all genetic diseases are due to an error in transcribing DNA, making one of those letters incorrect. And that can lead to type 1 diabetes, a bunch of other genetic diseases. We can also take the gene for insulin, put it into bacteria, and have bacteria make the insulin for us. Those are transgenic organisms. We're going to get to that later on, because that's part of the unity of living things. All genes work the same way. Doesn't matter what organism you're talking about, they all work the same way. So we can take genes from one species and put them into another, and make a whole new organism. Okay. Movement, growth, reproduction, and cellular activities of life are work and require energy. The input of energy from the earth is from the sun. And later on, we're going to talk about photosynthesis and how we convert light energy into chemical energy. And then this chemical energy can be used to perform work. And the autotrophs make the sugar from CO2, water, and sunlight, and then they use the sugar to fuel their activities. We can eat the plant or eat the animal that ate the plant to get that energy to form our activities. Okay, so it's conversion of solar energy into chemical energy. So photons into protons. We'll get to that. So organisms use food as a source of energy by breaking chemical bonds. We not even know what a chemical bond, may not even know what a chemical bond is yet. We'll be talking about that actually in the next chapter in basic chemistry and how this works. And later on, how we have these energy conversions to turn the food that you eat into usable energy. When I say usable energy, I mean energy that you can use to do work. the food that we eat, the chemical energy in that food is not in the proper form. It has to be converted into a molecule called ATP. Okay. But energy flows through an ecosystem, comes off as light, is converted to chemical energy. The chemical energy is used to do work, and it eventually all becomes heat and leaves as heat. So it's a flow of energy through the ecosystem, a constant flow all the time due to the light from the sun. And there it is. Inflow of light energy. This really shows, I think there's an error in here, that light energy should be going to the producers, the plants, the green plants. They make the sugar from the CO2, water, and the sunlight, and the goat eats the consumer, an animal, eats the grass and can take that chemical energy and convert it to its own chemical energy to do its own work, and then that'll eventually leave as heat. And then you need to get more energy. You never make energy, you can't make energy, you can't destroy it. You can just take it in, use it, and it leaves as heat. So, within all living cells, a vast network of interconnected chemical reactions. We'll get into what are chemical reactions later on. This is called metabolism. Every living thing metabolizes, converts energy, takes energy in, converts it, uses it to do work. And it mentions, I'm not sure why it mentions the energy transformations can be disrupted by hydrogen cyanide. We are aerobic organisms, we have to breathe oxygen, and we're going to later on get into why you need to breathe oxygen. What's so special about oxygen? But hydrogen cyanide is so toxic, it blocks the use of oxygen, and you will asphyxiate in the presence of lots of oxygen. So it disrupts metabolic reactions. Okay, what is the key difference between how energy and matter move in ecosystems? Well, we can make matter. We can grow and make ourselves larger, but energy we can't make or destroy energy. You can make matter and you can destroy matter. You can't make or destroy energy. That's it. It comes in, it's used to do work, maybe make matter, and then leaves as heat. The primary way in which energy leaves your body, heat. Every bit of energy that comes into your body will eventually leave as heat. And on that note, I'm going to call it, and we'll pick up from this slide in the next video lecture.